Hello, and welcome to the final video in my three-part series, where we take a look back at the influential Streets of Rage games and see what improvements and changes each iteration brings to the genre, and see just how they hold up today, as I go through gameplay breakdowns and share my opinions. As this game is a sequel, I'm going to be making various comparisons to the first and second game, which I've already made videos about, so if you're unfamiliar with the game, I'd recommend giving them a look to get an idea of some of the visual and gameplay differences, as well as some of the opinions that I'll be discussing. So without further ado, let's jump into the final game in the Genesis Mega Drive trilogy with 1994's Streets of Rage 3. When starting up the game, if you don't happen to be playing the Japanese version, Bare Knuckle 3, you will notice minutes into booting up the game that returning characters Axel, Blaze and Skate have different coloured outfits from the ones seen in the last game. And while this may seem like a simple change, there are a wealth of differences between the Japanese and international release of the game, which we'll be comparing as we explore further. Thankfully, with the many ports that exist, we now have the ability to play through either version, but sadly Bare Knuckle 3's story text remains in Japanese, but at least it's been translated for us to make sense of. Going forward, from time to time, I'll be referring to the Japanese release as Bare Knuckle 3, and the international release as Streets of Rage 3 to avoid any confusion. If you're interested in more detailed regional differences, there will be a link to the cutting room floor page for Streets of Rage 3 in the description. So before gameplay even begins, the first regional difference is the story. After being defeated twice now, Mr. X has been keeping a low profile with his new research facility, RoboSci, using this as cover for his illegal activity, all while he slowly builds up a robot army of clones to take the place of important officials within the city, with the help of Dr. Dharm, the world's best roboticist. The Syndicate has placed bombs around the city to distract while they begin putting the plan into action. Dr. Zan discovers the nature of the Syndicate's research and quickly contacts Blaze Fielding about it, who then rounds up Axel and Skate as they head out once again to take down the Syndicate. Adam is supposedly busy with other important work, so was unable to help with this operation, which is a shame. However, he does make an appearance in the story towards the end of the game. In Bare Knuckle 3, the story begins with a much darker tone. The Syndicate tested their experimental weapon in the city, leaving 80,000 wounded and 30,000 dead after it detonated. The bomb emits a huge amount of radiation referred to as Rakushin. This element was created by Dr. Gilbert Zan, and soon after the disaster he contacts Blaze, realizing it's being harnessed as a weapon. Blaze is quick to trust him and round up Axel and Skate to put a stop to it. With a potential conflict on the horizon, a general known as Ivan Petrov was due to attend a peace talk somewhere resembling the White House but has mysteriously gone missing. Much more brutal and fleshed out than the international version. As you progress through the game, each stage ends with a cutscene, adding further depth and purpose to the storyline, keeping you engaged and wanting to know what happens next. If only we had gotten the more exciting sounding story from Bare Knuckle 3. It's worth noting that the international version is much harder than the Japanese version, with the international normal mode being harder than the Japanese hard mode. This is thought to be so that you wouldn't have been able to complete the game during a rental period and would have to buy it at full price to be able to finish it. There are 4 playable characters, namely Axel, Blaze, Skate, and newcomer Dr. Zan, a cyborg previously involved in researching for the Syndicate. There is also the potential to unlock a further 2 characters during the course of the game, each with their own unique set of moves and specials, however they're unable to pick up and use weapons. The first unlockable character is Shiva, an antagonist first seen in Streets of Rage 2, and becomes playable after defeating him during his encounter and holding down the A button until the next stage begins. Another newcomer, Roo the Kangaroo, will become playable if you're able to spare him and only take out the Jester during their fight. Rather than being on the character select screen, you can only choose to play as these characters after selecting them when using a continuing game. These are fun little extras, giving the game more potential replay value. Bare Knuckle 3 contains one extra playable character, the highly controversial Ashe, who was omitted from the international release due to being potentially offensive, which is unfortunate, but through hacking he can be made playable again, or you can simply play as him in the Japanese version. There are a lot of great gameplay improvements in Streets of Rage 3 that make it really enjoyable to play through. The sprites are even more detailed than the previous game, and the animations look a lot bouncier than before, giving a speedy flow to the gameplay. There are a new array of enemies to take down with their own individual styles and traits. New movement options are introduced into Streets of Rage 3, such as being able to roll up and down and being able to run in stages, something which made skate completely unique in Streets of Rage 2. This makes manoeuvring around in stages much more fun and varied, allowing you to dodge certain attacks. The character-specific special moves that made their debut in the second game make a return, functioning exactly how they did before, with only skate receiving one altered move. While you can still use them exactly how you could before by performing moves as many times as your health bar would allow, a new special meter is introduced, allowing you to perform one special move without a health penalty as long as the meter is at max capacity. Luckily, it fills up pretty quickly, allowing you to use a wider range of moves more often without any penalty. Because of this bar, it does mean, unlike the previous game, that any special move you use when the bar is empty will cost you health. Strangely, perhaps in relation to the regional difficulty difference between Streets of Rage 3 and Bare Knuckle 3, the amount of health you lose when performing a special without full meter is quite different. And of course, blitz attacks are back, but it definitely feels like the damage has been scaled back on them, I guess for balancing reasons as they were pretty strong in the last game. However, if you play well, you can accumulate up to 3 stars based on your score, which will boost your blitz attack as long as you don't lose a life. They are still as fun as ever to use and complement each character's fighting technique well. You can perform your blitz attack straight from a run, giving combat a smooth flow with all your movement and attack options. The game's modes are exactly what you would have come to expect from the series, being able to play alone or with a pal, as well as the option to go head to head, and with all the new ways to move and attack in the game, it's a more enjoyable mode for it. Character stats are back once again, remaining near enough the same but trading out stamina for a new one called Reach, which is nice and self-explanatory, something which I felt I was able to notice from the very first Streets of Rage. Characters feel mostly similar to how they played in the previous game aside from the new movement options, so playstyles will feel comfortable coming from the last game, which is always nice. There are plenty of sub-areas in each stage and even secret paths, keeping things fresh and exciting as you progress through the game. Backgrounds look as beautiful as ever with plenty of new visual techniques introduced. Stage 2's club section being one of the most prominent and memorable, even if it does feel like it goes a bit overboard with the flashing and effects, it's still really cool. I'm not quite sure what happened with Stage 3's boss though, that one doesn't look so great in my opinion. Weapons of course are back and they are so much more interactive here. While they now have their own durability bar allowing for limited usage, each character can use these particular weapons in special ways when attacking after a run, and these are just so fun to use and look really cool in motion. The returning weapons are the knife, kunai, pipe and katana. The baseball bat makes a comeback from the original Streets of Rage, and there are also 2 new ones introduced, a piece of timber and a grenade, which are pretty fun to use. The standout feature with these are without a doubt the way they behave in a running attack. Axel can perform a charged running swing of the baseball bat, timber and pipe, Blaze performs an uppercut with the knife and kunai and can charge forward using the katana, Skate lunges through the air with the knife and kunai and can perform a vault-like attack with timber. Zan is not able to wield weapons like the other characters can, but any weapon he does pick up turns into a ball of energy, which he's able to throw across the floor at varying speed depending on your input. And just like before, you're able to throw any weapon, giving you full control over your playstyle. Bosses and sub-bosses are back, and are just as difficult and memorable as the ones found in the last game. I found Stage 6's Jet to be the biggest pain, as he always has minions around during the fight, making it particularly annoying. By the time you reach Stage 3, you can tell more focus was put into the story of the game as you face off against a robot copy of Axel mentioned in a prior cutscene, showing how Mr. X's plans are already coming to fruition, and as early as Stage 5, you make it to who you believe to be Mr. X, but you quickly find that's also a robot copy. With the story being more prominent, there are 4 different endings available to the player, giving more replay value and consequences for performance, which is a really great feature. When playing on easy mode, you can only progress to Stage 5, unveiling the first of the bad endings. Robot X tells you that you've only defeated his stand-in, and that we don't know the location of his hostage. Axel is still thought to be a criminal because of the robot copy, and he even goes as far to tell you that you play like a beginner, hinting that you need to put the difficulty up to go further. The screen cuts to what looks to be Mr. X watching through a projector, signalling that you've got the bad ending. Getting to stage 6 is where you can trigger the other 3 endings. You're put into a rough situation, and if this is your first time playing and you have no knowledge of what to do, you will most likely trigger another bad ending by allowing the time to run out. Gas releases into the rooms, which will kill the Chief of Police if you don't make it to him in time. Allowing this to happen sees you carry on to City Hall in order to stop the robot clone giving his speech as the Chief, and you will fight Shiva once again as the final boss. Then, much like the bad ending, it cuts to Mr. X watching through a projector. If you're able to reach the Chief in time during stage 6, you will then proceed to Mr. X's robot research facility while Adam takes the Chief to the press conference. For some reason, in death, the Chief knows exactly what's going to take place at the conference, but when you save him, he can't understand why he's even been kidnapped. Very strange plot hole. Making it to the end of the research facility will see you fight through many robots as expected to make it to Dr. Dharm, the person responsible for creating all the robot clones. Once you take out his machine, you finally make it to Mr. X, who is now just a brain in the jar. He tries to take you down by controlling Robot Y, the game's final boss. During the fight, you're given a 3-minute time limit, paving the way for the final 2 potential endings. Luckily, the boss is really easy to defeat, meaning obtaining the true ending is actually easier than obtaining the final bad ending. Allowing the timer to expire means while managing to finally kill Mr. X, all the bombs around the city will have been detonated, killing many people and destroying a significant portion of the city, leaving the general public devastated and lacking in trust. Whereas defeating the final boss within the time limit will see that you kill Mr. X once and for all and save the city from destruction, foiling his plan and seeing that everything is peaceful once again. Dr. Zan is forgiven for his initial assistance with the Syndicate, and the team part ways until we finally get to see what brings them back together very soon. The gameplay improves on its predecessor and manages to push beat-em-up gameplay even further in terms of fluidity and range of attack options, which always makes it an enjoyable time. Your choice of moves are similar to the previous game, but attacks feel much faster. You have the standard jab attack, which can be comboed, which downs enemies and looks really nice in motion, as well as your back attack for crowded situations. Jump attacks have 2 variants, one downing the enemy and the other putting into hit stun, allowing for throws and combo potential as seen in Streets of Rage 2, which felt like a great addition to the gameplay, so it's good to see it back. As mentioned before, it's really the movement options and weapon interactions in this game that help it stand out from the other iterations, and they are such welcome additions, making controlling your character even more enjoyable than it was before. Hit stun is still here, which will work on some enemies, but it's been scaled back, and because combos come out faster, it's difficult to cheese through like you were able to in previous games, which is probably for the best. It's clear the development team took notice and made suitable reductions. It was still pretty fun to be able to do it though, so thankfully you can still enjoy it in those respective games. This is where the disparity kicks in between fans of the series. The soundtrack to Streets of Rage 3 certainly is a divisive one, and I can see why. Both Yuzo Koshiro and Motohiro Kawashima, who worked on the Streets of Rage 2 soundtrack together, returned to work on the soundtrack, but overall it's not all that similar to the previous games. Hard techno still had an influence, but one of the main reasons it sounds so different is due to Koshiro creating a new composition method which helped provide randomized sequences that sounded very experimental. Depending on your personal taste, it might be something you really enjoy though. Considering the game's plot is very robot-centric, I think the music is quite fitting for the game, and while it's not to my particular taste, and I prefer the prior game's soundtrack, I can understand the direction the music was heading in, and appreciate what it tries to do. In terms of graphical quality, it looks really good in motion. Sprites are well detailed and animated, and stages do a great job at taking you through the story. There are a great varied amount of sub-areas in the game which are all well designed, and they all make sense in relation to the story. And it provides some exciting gameplay sections with moments like in Stage 3, where you are being pursued by a truck and have to attack it while breaking through walls to avoid getting crushed. So how do I think it holds up? Being honest, I wasn't as familiar with Streets of Rage 3 as I was with the previous 2 entries, having only played it a few times before. But I found myself being pleasantly surprised at how fun it is to play, along with the improvements. And while it's still not my favourite game in the series, of course that title still belongs to Streets of Rage 2, I thoroughly enjoyed my time with it, and I'd recommend it just as much as I would the other entries to anyone slightly interested, as well as fans of the genre. We are just days from the release of Streets of Rage 4 at the time of this upload, and I can't wait to play through it and see how it compares to the original trilogy. While Streets of Rage 3 isn't my personal favourite of the trilogy, it is still extremely fun to play and offers further expansion and improvement on its predecessor, and I would still recommend playing it. Whichever version you decide to play, be it Streets of Rage 3 or Bare Knuckle 3, you'll be in for a great time with solid beat 'em up gameplay. It is able to rise above its divisive reception and provide an enjoyable experience. Thank you so much for watching. This marks the end of How Does It Hold Up for the original Streets of Rage trilogy. As soon as Streets of Rage 4 releases, I'll be looking to give it a thorough playthrough and see just how it stacks up compared to the original trilogy. Until then, thank you once again.